Welcome to another week of the Superflexology Start Sit series, a proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Network. I'm your host, John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. And once again, it is a full house. I am joined by Mitch Sorensen. That's at DinoMC. What's going on, Mitch?
What's up, guys? Ready for another good week?
What, you feeling a little bit better after that food poisoning last week?
Yeah, a lot better. I learned it's the best way to not tinker with your lineups, which works actually really well.
All right, so maybe you should eat the same thing every single week. Also joined by Jordan Lindsay. That's at Jailbreak Screen on Twitter. What's up, Jordan?
Yeah, I also had food poisoning last week. That's my excuse. No, I'm just kidding. What's going on, guys?
I was going to say, wait, but you too? Come on.
No, that's my excuse. So let's move on. Let's move on.
All right, we'll move forward here. And then also joined by Dan Lamagna. That's at LC_Dean. What's going on, Dan?
I am stoked for week 5. Weeks 1 and 2 were great. Weeks 3 and 4 were not great. Week 4 specifically, Mitch was like Michael Jordan. He had food poisoning, played best sick, picked Mariota. So I'm coming back after Mitch this week.
The only person in the country to be all in on the Titans last week. And I'm going to give Mitch a round of applause here. It did pay off. Now, looking at our season-long scoring, guys, Mitch took a commanding lead. Mitch has 14 points. Dan, you have 12 correct answers on the season. Jordan right behind Dan with 11. And still, I'm bringing up the rear with 10. But I have you guys right where I want you. Give it some time. I'll be creeping up. Don't worry. Looking at our start sit consensus answers last week, this was a rough week for us. We went 2-3-1 as a team. Over the last 3 weeks, this brings us to 9-6-2. Yes, Mitch, you talked about Mariota. You hit that one, and you hit A.J. Brown. But I want to spend a minute here to talk about the big miss that was last week, and that was Chris Godwin and Tyler Boyd. It was a 4-0 sweep. We all went with Tyler Boyd over Chris Godwin. And for me, it was sound reasoning. Chris Godwin going against the Rams, team struggling against them, their slot receivers, and then Tyler Boyd going against my Pittsburgh Steelers. And they said, shut the hell up, John, because they came to play on Monday night. They played top-notch defense. They shut down the Bengals. Nothing was working. So, guys, what are your thoughts on that? All week, even on Twitter, we were telling people, fade Chris Godwin. Dan, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on how that transpired last week?
You always remember your bad decisions more than you do the good ones sometimes. And Chris Godwin hurt, but we always say trust the process. God would normally be a great play. Him and Boyd are both excellent receivers, but all week we're hearing about Godwin being injured, not practicing. All those arrows were pointing to Boyd. So I still defend our process, but boy, the results was rough.
It was a rough one. And Mitch, do you want to have the floor here to talk about your success? I think you went 5 for 6 last week.
Yeah, it was just domination. I mean, hopefully everyone will just start to listen, ignore what you guys say, and just do whatever, I say to do. But on the Godwin thing, it's like, I don't feel bad about sitting him in the spots that I did last week. The way that I look at it, the way that I look at every week is the exact same. And if he was playing the Rams this week again, I probably wouldn't say to start him again, So it's just one of those things.
It was just such an anomaly. And the way the Rams played weeks 1 through 3 against slot receivers, it was completely different. And Chris Godwin, I looked at the numbers after the fact, and he was in the slot a majority of the time against the Rams. But it didn't matter. They could not stop him. Jordan, I'm sure you were happy with the end result there with the Buccaneers beating the Rams. And it actually wiped me out in all of my survivor polls. So I am sad to share that. But let's move forward here. Week 4 is behind us. Week 5 quickly approaching. First question here, we're going to start with you, Jordan. And I'm going to say, before we get into these questions, these are tough ones. We have 5 questions lined up, and I struggled with a few of these. So first question, Jordan, full PPR, Jamison Crowder at Philadelphia or Wayne Gallman against Minnesota. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, this one's tough. It's so gross. I was kind of hoping that I would go last here just so I could pick the opposite of Mitch because I could go either way with this one. But at this point, since it is going to be a flex spot, I'm going to trust the running back volume of Wayne Gallman more than the passing volume of Jamison Crowder. I know he had 14 targets last week, or week 3 last time he played. I don't know what to make of the Jets offense. I don't trust it. I know the Vikings defense is good, but the New York Giants running back gets targets and he's going to get the work on the ground. So he's going to have more chances to score than probably Jamison Crowder, who doesn't really find the end zone anyway. And I just don't trust the Jets passing volume as it is.
All right, Mitch, what about you? What are your thoughts here?
I'm agree with Jordan on this and go with Gallman, just because my biggest worry was I didn't know if Daniel Jones was going to pass to the running back. And that's something I always worry about a little bit with rookie quarterbacks. But Gallman got 6 catches, and that was in a game to where they were dominating the entire time. So I think his receiving ceiling is actually pretty high. And with how we have no idea what's going on with Darnold so far this week, I'm going to take Gallman.
Yeah, as of now, as of Wednesday, it sounds like Darnold was involved at practice, no contact. And then there were some reports there were issues with his spleen, so I'm not really sure what's going on with that. But it is going to be interesting to see what happens with that quarterback situation. I would be very shocked personally to see Sam Darnold suit up this Sunday. Dan the Man, what are your thoughts here?
Jordan mentioned earlier these were tough picks tonight. And as I look at like the 10 players that we're going to be reviewing, 4 of them were on my preseason sleeper list, for lack of better words, sleepers, but guys I was just really high on. Jamison Crowder was one of them. In past weeks, I'm going to join the wishy-washy club here and say, if Darnold pulls a miracle and plays, I think they're really trying to get him play because the Jets are desperate. They know they can't move the ball without Darnold. If he does play, I'm going to go against the grain here, guys, and say Jamison Crowder. Their head coach keeps saying that Crowder's the guy that has the juice in that offense. He's a PPR machine. Chris Herndon, I believe, returns. So, now you got to defend a few more guys. And against that poor Eagles secondary, I'm going to go with Jamison Crowder if Darnold plays. And as far as Gallman, he's not playing the Redskins, guys. It's the Minnesota Vikings here. And he's also been limited at practice this week. So I want to go for the high upside, the higher ceiling. I know the floor is scary, but give me Crowder.
So, Dan, are you taking Crowder regardless?
If Darnold plays.
All right, so Gallman if he does not play. And then I'm strictly going with Gallman. I know we talk about the Philadelphia pass defense, and they have been absolutely atrocious. But when you look at the guys that have beat them, it's wide receivers Terry McLaurin, Julio, Ridley, Marvin Jones, Devontae Adams, all players that don't typically run out of the slot. When you look at the slot receivers in those matchups, Trey Quinn, Mohamed Sanu, Danny Amendola, Geronimo Allison. Yeah, Geronimo Allison scored last week, but those 4 guys, they didn't really do much against this defense out of the slot. I'm going with Wayne Gallman. I think it's a safer floor. And while he wasn't extremely efficient from a running perspective, Mitch, you talked about it already, 6 receptions on 7 targets. That's something that I love to see with a running back, especially if this is probably a situation in a deeper league or just a last flex spot, or maybe you have bye weeks, injuries. So, it's desperate times here. I'm going to take Wayne Gallman. I think he's a little bit safer. 4-0 if Sam Darnold does not play. But if Sam Darnold does play, Dan, you're taking Crowder. It should be very interesting to see. This next question, and Mitch, we're going to start with you. 2 quarterbacks. And no, guys, don't worry. It's not Baker Mayfield versus Marcus Mariota for the 3rd time. This week, Right. Mitch, the biggest Mariota lover of them all now. This week, we're looking at Phillip Rivers against Denver or Jacoby Brissett versus Kansas City. Mitch, what are your thoughts here?
See, I think Rivers is fine. I think he's an okay play. I wouldn't mind having him in my lineups, but Brissett's going to give you that ceiling. So in the last 2 games, he's thrown for 585 yards and 5 touchdowns. And that wasn't against Kansas City, and we know Kansas City is going to put up a lot of points. The Colts are missing some key defenders on their defense. And Brissett's going to have to pass. And hopefully Hilton's back this week because they didn't have him last week. And Brissett still had to throw for, I think it was over 300 yards. So give me Brissett, and it's pretty easy for me this week. I think that's a pretty easy play.
Okay. You sound pretty confident. Dan, what are your thoughts here?
See, the Michael Jordan over there is feeling good this week. He's going with Brissett. He's off his game. He's not in that zone anymore. I'm going opposite with Phillip Rivers. I told you I was gunning for Mitch. Rivers, and these are 2 interesting games here because I think there's only 2 games at 4 o'clock with the Chargers, Denver being one of them, and then Kansas City, Colts being the night game. So these will be 2 games we'll all be watching.
I hate when that happens. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I hate when there's only 2 4 o'clock games. It drives me crazy.
Tell me about it. The man cave has 3 big screens. I can only use 2 of them, so I'm a little bit disappointed. But in Los Angeles, Rivers has been throwing 30 to 40 attempts per game. I think he's going to give the better chance of that 300-yard DraftKings bonus. I still view the Colts as a run team. I know they're going to have to pick it up a little bit this week, but Hilton's still questionable. I think KC has the Colts number. Give me Phillip Rivers.
All right. Finally, a little bit of difference of opinion here. Jordan, what are your thoughts?
I'm also going to go Rivers just because the only thing worse than the Denver offense is probably the Denver defense. Their defense is so bad. They just lost Bradley Chubb for the year, too. And like Dan said, Rivers been throwing the ball a ton. He's going to throw the ball a ton. He doesn't need Mike Williams, whether he plays or not. Without Hilton, I know Brissett did have a pretty good game last week, but against the Chiefs, I just don't see it. I'm going to go with Phillip Rivers as well.
All right, so I'm going to make this one a 2-2 split. And I was surprised when I looked at some numbers. Jacoby Brissett, so far through 4 weeks, he is one of only 6 quarterbacks to put up at least 16 fantasy points per game this season. Well, 16 fantasy points in every game. So while we look at him against this Kansas City defense and we say he has that ceiling, which I agree, he also gives us a pretty solid floor. He's been +2 every single game in terms of touchdowns versus interceptions. And while last week we didn't see T.Y. Hilton, he was still able to produce from a fantasy perspective, had to throw 40 plus times. And part of that was they were trailing. Marlon Mack got injured towards the end. It seems like that ankle is going to be okay. But for me, it's going to be Jacoby Brissett. I like Phillip Rivers. I think he's a safe option. But for a little more upside with just as good of a floor here, I also want Jacoby Brissett.
John, you concerned about home field advantage in those 2 picks there? Kansas City being a very tough place to play where Rivers has home field advantage?
I'm not, because I think the pass attempts are going to be there. I don't know if we're going to see the +2 in terms of touchdowns and interceptions like we've seen in the first 4 weeks with Brissett. And we saw that defense kind of cause havoc with Lamar Jackson. But they're going to be forced to throw the ball. It's going to be a fast-paced game. Dan, you always talk about the implied points and the over-unders, and I don't know offhand what the over-under is on this game, but I have to assume it's high.
It is. I mean, the over-under in the KC Colts game's the way to go, but the Chargers are predicted to score more points than the Colts. So it's tilting me a little bit, San Diego, or Los Angeles. Old habit.
Yeah, you're living in the past here, San Diego. I still do that from time to time. And I know when Oakland moves to Las Vegas, I'm still going to mess that up too. So as it happens, every so often here on the Superflexology Start Sit series, we have a 2-2 split. It will be interesting. We'll see how it goes. This next one's going to be interesting. And we're mixing positions here, clearly a flex play. So Jordan, full PPR. And it's not tight end premium. Mark Andrews at Pittsburgh or Marquez Valdez-Scantling at Dallas in a game where we're probably not going to see Devontae Adams. So, Jordan, what are your thoughts on this one?
I know the perceived thing is that Marquez Valdez-Scantling is going to hop into the number 1 role, which we've never seen him do. And truthfully, against the Cowboys defense, I don't know if he's really going to succeed all that well. I don't really want anything to do with the Packers offense this week without Adams. I think they're able to key on pretty much anything they want to without Adams. There's a lot less to worry about. So, I'm going to go with Mark Andrews. I don't think Pittsburgh D is going to hold up 2 weeks in a row. Sorry, John. But Andrews is he's going to find some open space in that defense. Lamar he's one of like 2 or 3, 4 quarterbacks that has placed in the top 12 every week. So he's a safe play. Mark Andrews is definitely his favorite target. So I'm going to go with Mark Andrews.
Dan, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm with you, Jordan. Preseason brand here, Mark Andrews. I've been with him all the way, and I'm going to stick with that. I think if you're looking at volume and consistency and a role in the red zone, Mark Andrews is the guy. And, against the grain here a little bit, John, you make the point it's not tight end premium, but I just think in that Baltimore offense, Andrews is such an integral role. I think there's Marquise Brown, and then there's Andrews. And Scantling, I'm even thinking Adams may play, but MVS has just been too inconsistent despite getting the targets. So I'm going to stay on brand. Give me Mark Andrews.
And just like Jordan talked about, one of our talking points to wrap up last week's show, don't be afraid to play 2 tight ends. They've been very productive. And you look at the numbers that we've seen from them when you match them up against wide receivers, they're holding their own. So I can see why you guys would take Mark Andrews in this situation. Before I answer, Mitch, I'm going to turn it over to you. What do you think on this one? Mark Andrews, MVS.
See, I'm going to go the same way as everyone else. So we've seen it last year when AJ Green went out and Marvin Jones went out. Both Boyd and Golladay, even though they got more targets, it didn't actually matter at the end of the day because their catch rates dropped by that amount. The targets just weren't as good. And so MVS against Dallas, like Jordan was saying, there's just no way I'm going to play him. And with Andrews, he already has 6 targets in the red zone in 4 games. So I think it's just a much safer play this week. So I'll go with Andrews too.
I'm going to go against the grain here. And for once, I'm supporting the Pittsburgh Steelers. They actually, if you take away those 2 touchdowns by Will Dissly in that Seattle game, they've been very solid against tight ends. And that even includes the game against San Francisco with George Kittle. For upside, I'm taking MVS here. And I'm not going to be wishy-washy, Dan, so don't worry. I did want to say if Adams was out, give me MVS. But regardless, give me MVS. I like Mark Andrews. I've been growing to like him a little bit more. I know Mitch and we were a little off on him on the offseason, and that clearly was a miss. We'll own that. But for this week still, give me MVS against Dallas. Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be looking to move the ball here, and I want MVS whether or not Adams is in the game. So majority there, you three guys, Mark Andrews against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'll take MVS at Dallas. All right, Dan, you're going to start us off here, and here's two high ceiling guys, and they also come with a low floor. So full PPR, Sammy Watkins against Indianapolis, or DK Metcalf against the Los Angeles Rams?
These are like the two fancy guys here, exciting players. Like you mentioned, sometimes low floors. But for me, this was the easiest one of them all. I have Sammy Watkins in a landslide here. Looking at his targets the first 4 weeks, 11, 13, 8, 6. He's an integral part of that Kansas City offense. Last week, he just missed a touchdown. A guy made a nice play in the end zone on him, but it was close. I just feel like another big game is coming. It's just a matter of when. And as far as DK Metcalf, I've been watching Seattle a lot, watching Metcalf. Took him in a couple of DFS lineups throughout the past weeks, and he just seems like a one-trick pony. It's that quick fade. It's either he's going to catch one or two or he's going to get none. So I'm not feeling Metcalf at all. Give me Sammy Watkins with a high-scoring game and potentially a very big game coming.
All right, Mitch, what do you think here?
I think DK is going to have one of those huge boom weeks we see from these kind of guys, Robbie Anderson, Deshaun Jackson, where he's going to go out and get 35 points one week. But trying to pick that week is super hard. So I think the smart pick here is just to do what Dan said and go with Watkins. He has 40 targets, and it's just a much safer play, even though DK could bring you that massive ceiling as well. I just don't like the floor if they only end up throwing 35 times this week.
I was just going to say, do you have your crystal ball out, and is this week one of those 35-point games? But based on your answer, I'm guessing you're going with no.
Yeah, no. I mean, it could be, but just odds-wise, it's probably not going to be. So I'll just go with Watkins.
Exactly. It's so hard to pick out those weeks for these boom and bust guys. Jordan, what do you think here? Watkins, Metcalf, is it an easy decision for you as well?
I mean, it's easy just because I'm the type of person that plays the safe play. So, I mean, just that said, I'm also going to go with Watkins. But here's why I think you could play Metcalf. It's the Thursday night game. The Rams defense is probably still exhausted from that shellacking that the Bucs gave them on Sunday. And, teams simplify the playbook on Thursday. And simplifying the playbook for DK Metcalf is basically running the same playbook. You just run in a straight line. So I think that DK could, like I said, just catch 4 balls for 3 touchdowns and 142 yards. And that's
so nonchalant.
Awesome. I mean, that's not a big deal. But, that's where I'm at. So, if I want the safe play who can also, boom for 30 points, it's going to be Watkins. But, I mean, if you really want to just see what you can do, play DK. It'll be fun.
I'm going Sammy Watkins. This is an easy one for me. I think both have an equally high ceiling, but Sammy Watkins, even though he's, and I'm using air quotes here, he's disappeared the last few weeks, he's still going to get you 8 to 10 points in PPR. So while he's safer and an equally high floor, this was easy for me. Sammy Watkins. So 4-0 sweep there. I hope this isn't another 4-0 sweep like that Godwin massacre from last week, but we'll see how it plays out. And we have one more question here. And Mitch, let's start with you on this one. Another one, it's full PPR, and it's 2 different positions. So we're looking at a flex spot. DJ Moore or Jordan Howard. And we've talked about it previously. This is one of those questions that if you asked it before week 1, we would have thought somebody was crazy.
Yeah, definitely. But since Kyle Allen took over, DJ Moore only has 2 targets and 5 targets in his last 2 games. So he's just not even getting the work for a wide receiver 2. And that's not even wide receiver 3 territory at this point. So I think by default, I'm just going to go Jordan Howard. He's no one that I ever really want to put in my lineup, but I'm not going to play DJ Moore in Jacksonville. DJ Moore against Jacksonville. I'm just going to go with the easy play. Go Jordan Howard. He had 7 red zone touches last week, and Miles Sanders only had 1. So maybe he's going to be the preferred back in that red zone going forward. And so if I could get the touchdown upside with Howard, I'll just go with that play.
All right. Dan, what are your thoughts here?
This was a tough one. I think I changed my mind about 4 times today, but I wanted to have some conviction by the time I got to the show. Mitch raises some good points. Moore hasn't really produced, hasn't had the production. Kyle Allen's went a little bit more to Samuel. When Moore has had the ball, he's still made some plays and scored some points. I do think he'll pick it up a little bit better this week versus Jacksonville playing, out of the slot. I think it'll definitely be a CMC game. But even though he's an on-brand pick, and I like DJ Moore like I do Watkins and Andrews and Crowder, I'm going to go against the grain here and join Mitch and go with Jordan Howard. I think the Jets stink. I think Howard will score. You know, it kind of comes out of my list of James Washington sleepers from the preseason, although I officially give up on James Washington. But Jordan Howard was out of that same camp that Adam Schefter mentioned. That trainer was Pete Bomarito. I didn't have the name a couple weeks ago, but he trains all these NFL guys. And he said in the offseason, Jordan Howard, just a light bulb went off with him, and he's in incredible shape. And yeah, he's coming off a great game. So I think he'll continue that versus the Jets. I think him and Miles Sanders will do well. Jordan Howard definitely finds the end zone and scores more than DJ Moore.
Jordan, are you going to stay consistent here? Are you going to make it 3-0 Jordan Howard?
Yeah, it's Jordan Howard. The Jets are a joke. That's about all I got to offer. It's Jordan Howard.
Now, is this take strictly because you have the same first name?
Absolutely not. I hate Jordan Howard, man. No, but I mean, yeah, I can't trust DJ Moore at all. You know, I'm probably going to say that. We're probably all going to take Jordan Howard. DJ Moore's going to need 11 targets, and he's going to laugh in our face this week. But I'm just going to take the safe guy. I'm going to take him, like I alluded to earlier, the flex running back volume. I trust that more than the receiver in most cases, especially when DJ Moore's getting 7 targets combined the last 2 weeks. So, yeah, Jordan Howard for sure.
I'm going to make this easy. I'm going Jordan Howard as well. We talk about the 7 targets over the last 2 games. Then we look at Jordan Howard, and he's actually had a higher snap share as the season's progressed, and he was up over 50% in week 4, and he's looked good. And Miles Sanders has also looked good. So I'm not saying it's the either or type situation, but it does seem like Jordan Howard is going to be it's almost like the old school, and I say old school when it's not really that old school, but the Ron Dane and Tiki Barber, the Thunder and Lightning. It's kind of one of those situations, and it seems like Jordan Howard is going to be the power there in that backfield. And I think the Eagles get off to an early lead, they start running the ball, and they get red zone opportunities. So for me, this was also an easy one. Jordan Howard over DJ Moore, 4-0. So looking forward to the Week 5 DFS takes. Now, there's something I want to mention. I mentioned this to you guys offline. We're going to do a giveaway here. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be giving away an autographed Tyler Boyd jersey. We'll be posting a picture on Twitter. It's going to be fantastic. So the way to be entered into this contest, if you play in your DraftKings lineup, whatever player under $6,000 that we say to put in your lineup, if you play that player and they don't give you a 3 times return on the price, send us a screenshot. You'll be entered to win. First of all, it's just something to give back to the listeners, but also it's a way to hold ourselves more accountable. If we're not giving you the correct pick, you should be able to get something in return. And so, like I said, Tyler Boyd autographed jersey, that's going to be a giveaway that we're doing over the next few weeks. Just something fun to engage the listeners. So I'm really looking forward to that. Over $6,000 fades. Mitch, start us off.
I'm going to fade Alvin Kamara.
And there it is.
Yeah, I actually think this is going to be, I was guessing it's going to be Jordan's too. I don't know if I'm right on that or not. But Jordan actually gave me the idea last week when we were talking about in the group chat. Tampa Bay's just shut everybody down. Gurley had a decent week last week, but they still held him to 16 yards rushing. He just got those 2 rushing touchdowns. They shut down Christian McCaffrey. Barkley ended up getting injured in that game when he played, but he's 8,600, and I have no idea why DraftKings would price him up in this matchup. He doesn't get the rushing attempts that the other backs do. I mean, he could get you 13, 14 targets, but when you get someone like Christian McCaffrey, who's giving you that many targets, but is also giving you another 20 carries on top of it for only 400 more, you just have to play McCaffrey. And I just can't see playing with Kamara in any lineup this week.
Jordan, was Mitch right? Is this your guy as well?
It's actually not. I mean, I appreciate you thinking of me, but it's actually not.
Who do you have this week, Jordan?
Mine is actually Le'Veon Bell at 6,800. I mentioned earlier the Jets are terrible. I think there's going to be a lot of 3-and-outs, a lot of turnovers. And I think a lot of his groundwork's going to get phased out. And he still could finish with 15 to 20 touches, but I don't think there's going to be much, if any at all, return on investment there.
And we've talked about how stiff that Philadelphia run defense can be. So Le'Veon Bell wasn't really on my radar, but I think that's a good one to throw in here for over $6,000 fades. Dan, over to you. Who are you looking at?
I'm going to start at the top of the chart here with Mitch, and not going with Kamara, but I want to help our listeners who are, looking team jam them in. And you see CMC, Kamara, Cook, and Elliott at the top of the board. And as much as it hurts me, I'm going to say fade Zeke Elliott at 8,300. I like CMC. I also like Kamara, and I like Dalvin Cook all more than Zeke this week. And below him, I also like Nuke at 7,800 and Julio at I think 77. So there's 4 or 5 studs before Zeke that I think you're better off going with. Watching my Cowboys, something's just missing. Zeke's not hitting those home run plays like McCaffrey and Kamara and Cook is. Last week I think was a learning game for Kellen Moore. So now I need to see a little bit more and hope he could fix it. But New Orleans calling all these run blitzes and Dallas is just running right into the blitzes. Plus, big Tyron Smith is out at left tackle. I think that's a tough break for the Cowboys this week. I think they'll be okay as a team, but I'm saying fade Zeke Elliott and take one of the other big guys.
All right, Dan, well, you're going to have to talk some sense into me because in my early week lineups, and then obviously I go in and tinker a little bit. I have Zeke in every single lineup at 8,300. I actually love him this week. So talk some sense into me. Why should I get him out of my lineup?
In redraft regular leagues, you want to still ride Zeke, but when it comes to DFS, I'm programmed for GPP versus Cashier Bauer, so that's a little disclaimer here. I'm always thinking GPP. I want the guy that could potentially blow up, and I just think McCaffrey gets so much volume. I mean, Tampa Bay in New Orleans, I know they've been tough against the run, but I think in New Orleans, Kamara's bound to break one. Dalvin Cook's playing the Giants. I think the Giants are terrible, so I think Dalvin Cook bounces back. So it's not so much that I don't like Zeke, I just like those other guys more. And whether you're jamming in the running backs or I look at Hopkins and Julio, I think that could be a sneaky high-scoring game, kind of like the Bucs-Rams were last week. So it's not so much I don't like Zeke, but compared to the other guys, I think they have higher ceilings.
Yeah, for me, I just see what Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders did last week to that Packers defense. And the Packers' pass defense actually hasn't been that bad, but their run defense has just been gashed. And this was, for me, I thought it was a slam dunk. But maybe I have to reevaluate this. And Dan, maybe you're going to give me something to think about, especially you being the Dallas Cowboys fan, and I see your little picture here on our Skype chat with your Dak Prescott jersey. So maybe I have to reevaluate here.
And of course, you're going to get in my head now, too, and make me reevaluate. Because I could just be a salty Cowboy fan after that New Orleans game. That is possible.
Right. It absolutely happens. You see the way I am with the Steelers. So I'm going to go back to Mitch's pick, Alvin Kamara, against that stout Tampa Bay run defense. They held CMC in check. They held Barkley and Gallman when he came in, Gurley and Brown. I hate the matchup. And at running back 2 in terms of price at 8,600, I don't like it. I said I like Zeke at 8,300, and I love David Johnson at 7,500. You saw what James Conner and Jalen Samuels just did against that Cincinnati Bengals defense. They're just completely distraught, and I think David Johnson, this is a smash spot for him. But, we're not talking about the guys we would play over 6,000, but I did have to throw those in there. So Alvin Kamara, and then Le'Veon Bell, and then Zeke for Dan. So a couple high-priced running backs that the team here were looking to fade. Now, here are the under $6,000 plays, and this is where the jersey giveaway comes into play. So, Jordan, start us off under $6,000 that you need the listeners to get in their lineups.
Well, this guy, he has averaged at least 7 targets all 4 games to start the year and is averaging over 3 times fantasy points per game than his price is going this week. He's at 4,900. It's Cortland Sutton going against the Chargers. Like I said, he's had at least 7 targets in all 4 games this year. He's averaging 17 points of fantasy points per game. Over the first 4 weeks, that's enough sample size for me. And at 3 times the value just off the jump with only 2 touchdowns this year, I think that's a smash.
It's funny. I actually had him until I switched to the guy that I did, but I was looking at some things. Joe Flacco is one of only 3 quarterbacks, and it might be 4 now. I'm not sure if Tyler Boyd, I don't know if he jumped in there, but at the time he was one of only 3 quarterbacks that is supporting 2 top 24 receivers. Again, I didn't think we'd be hearing that coming into the season, but Emmanuel Sanders, Cortland Sutton, both productive, and Joe Flacco, he has 2 really valuable weapons. And at that price, I love that pick, Jordan. So yeah, I agree there. Mitch, what are your thoughts here? Under $6,000.
I really like this Sutton pick. That was a good one. So I'm going to go with Carlos Hyde. That Houston-Atlanta game has a 49-point over-under. Carlos Hyde's getting 15 touches a game going against that horrible Atlanta defense, and I think they're just going to get worse without Keanu Neal back there. And he's only 4,200. So if you get 15 touches out of a running back in that high scoring game, I think he's a pretty easy play. So I'm going to have him in most of my lineups where I need a save at running back.
I always go back and listen to our previous shows, and earlier today, I was listening to last week's show, and Dan, you mentioned, I actually agreed with you that this Atlanta defense, it wasn't as bad as they were supposed to be, and the Tennessee Titans were in trouble. Boy, were we wrong on that one. And Mitch, it seems like you're picking on the Atlanta Falcons defense once again.
Yeah, I do it every week with running backs, to be honest with you. It's something that we did all last year. They're actually a little bit better against receiving backs this year, but it's just that scheme. The running backs are always really good against Atlanta.
And we've seen the splits in Houston, and it's been a little bit surprising. You and I especially, we were on that Duke Johnson train, and Carlos Hyde, he's looked pretty solid. So at that price, I think that's a very safe option here to return 3 times on the investment. Now, Dan, you're the last one here before it gets to me. Do not steal my lock of the week. Who are you going with?
I will do my best. First, I got to say, I love hearing Mitch pick Carlos Hyde over Duke Johnson. That's a little inside joke, we know. But this one, I thought Jordan shook me up because I thought he was going to take mine, saying the guy averaged 7 targets per game. And the receiver that I'm picking is averaging 7 targets a game. Give me the guy that I tried all day to get off Mitch to try to make the show, even extra entertainment value. But Mitch was stubborn today. He wouldn't trade me. Give me Allen Robinson at 5,600, guys. He's going against the dysfunctional Oakland Raiders. I think Allen Robinson's a number 1 receiver. He's going to have low ownership. I believe in Chase Daniels, maybe more than Mitch Trubisky. I just think he's due for a 100-yard, 1 to 2 touchdown game. It's just a matter of time, and I think it's this weekend. So Allen Robinson under 6K for me.
You hit the nail on the head. Based on what we've seen so far, he is really going to be under-owned, especially in, obviously, GPPs. And the guy that I'm picking, he's kind of the running back equivalent. And again, I was messing with you guys earlier, but I said tonight, for the first time, going into week 5, I am giving our listeners the first ever JBG, John Bauer guarantee, Devontae Freeman. He's priced at running back 18, $5,300 against the Houston Texans defense. This defense, they've given up 30 receptions to running backs already through 4 weeks, and he's coming off an 8-catch game against Tennessee. He has not looked good on the ground, but to see him utilized in the pass game, that offensive line, they are struggling. Matt Ryan has to get rid of the ball. Devontae Freeman is going to be that safety valve, and last week, Ito Smith vultured a touchdown. If not for that, Devontae Freeman was pushing 24 fantasy points. After the first week of the Superflexology weekly series during the season, I said Devontae Adams was going to pop in week 4, and he did. After week 1, I said Devontae Freeman was going to pop in week 5. So this is it. Week 5 is upon us. I hope people invested in him. I hope you were able to buy him because that breakout game is coming. Again, absolute lock of the week from me. Under $4,000 plays. Jordan, we're going to start with you. Who's a guy that you like? Who has sneaky potential here?
I actually like Auden Tate from the Bengals. John Ross just went to the IR. And Auden Tate's actually been racking up targets. He had 6 last week. He had 10 in week 3. Week 2, he was a non-factor. In week 1, I don't even think he played. But, the arrow is pointing up. The John Ross is out of the picture. They have virtually nothing behind Tyler Boyd at this point. He's at 3,500, and I think, times 3 value would be 10.5 points. I think he could easily get you somewhere to 15 to 20 if it really plays out the way I think it could. And yeah, they're playing the Cardinals. Awful pasty. So I'm going to take that risk at 3,500. I think that's a no-brainer.
All right, Mitch, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I actually wrote up Auden Tate after I found out Andy Isabella isn't going to be the slot guy for Arizona, which doesn't make any sense at all. But Kingsbury came out today and said they're going to have Pharaoh Cooper, who's been back with the team for 1 day now, playing out the slot, and Isabella is going to be an outside wide receiver.
I saw that blurb. I saw that, yep.
I don't understand. Andy Isabella was going to be a smash play, I thought, this week. So I came home, wrote down Auden Tate. I love him as well. So I'm just going to go with Jordan and say, go with Tate.
All right. Dan, do you have somebody different for our listeners?
I do. I'm going to stay in the Chicago Bears theme here and say Anthony Miller finally shows up to fantasy football this week at $3,900. On the opposite side, I think John Gruden's going to scheme up just enough points to keep the Bears balanced and passing. Taylor Gabriel is out. He was a sneaky play for the Bears recently, but with him out, I think it's just Robinson and Miller. And at $3,900, I think you just get your return on the investment, and Anthony Miller finds the end zone.
How many times, Dan, are we going to let Anthony Miller break our hearts, though?
this will probably be the last, just like James Washington. If he doesn't come through for me in this pick here, I'm writing him off.
I was going to say you went from James Washington to Anthony Miller, and you might be looking for somebody else next week. But anyway, I'm actually not really going to add any value here. The one guy that I came into the show with was Auden Tate. John Ross, he's on IR. That guy just cannot stay healthy. But the Bengals defense is bad. Arizona's defense is bad. There should be some points here. And Jordan, you mentioned the 16 targets over the last 2 weeks. Auden Tate, 3,500. It seems like a no-brainer to me. And one thing I do want to point out, especially the first 2 weeks of the season, the Arizona Cardinals, they played the Detroit Lions and the Baltimore Ravens, and it seemed like they were trying to make the quarterback beat them. And Mitch, we talked about it after week 1, those stacked box percentages with Kerryon Johnson and CJ Anderson, they were like 50%. It was outrageous. And it was kind of similar against Mark Ingram in that Baltimore game. I'm hoping they kind of do the same thing, try to shut down Joe Mixon. It's going to open things up in that passing game for guys like Auden Tate, Tyler Boyd, Tyler Eifert. So we'll see how that goes. But so 3 picks here for Auden Tate. And then Dan, the man, you're coming in with Anthony Miller. Couple Bears receivers from Dan this week. Before we sign off, as we've been doing, let's throw out some closing thoughts. And Dan, let's start with you. Closing thoughts going into week 5.
Other than catching up here with Mitch this week, I'm going after Michael Jordan, like I said earlier. I always like to just give the listeners something to take back with them, and just want to tell everybody not to panic. It's only week 5. Very often in our group chats, our friends that are playing GPPs and these daily contests, they haven't won a lot, and they say they don't want to play anymore. You got to be patient. When you do win, you win big, and it's going to pay for your week, so hang in there. Same thing with redraft. It's week 5. Don't go selling your best guys out of desperation. One of our listeners was asking for advice, and he traded Darren Waller. He ended up getting Michael Thomas today off of someone who was desperate. So don't be desperate. Don't panic. Just trust the process, and things will pan out.
Mitch, what are your thoughts here?
I just want to say, be careful with Twitter polls. They're really insane right now. Even last week, I put one up just for the fun of it. It was after Terry McLaurin had his big game, and I put Terry McLaurin or Stefan Diggs. And it was like 60% for Terry McLaurin. And I mean, there might be 1 or 2 Diggs owners out there that would be willing to do that deal, but the vast majority of them will just ignore that offer. Just be super careful with it.
Yeah, you always have to take those with a grain of salt, especially whenever there's quarterbacks involved. It's just on one side. In super flex leagues, those polls are completely out of whack. So always take those with a grain of salt. Yes, they are. Last thoughts here. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, and in terms of DFS stuff, just listen to, Dan mentioned this before, listen to our process, listen to the reasons we want to play someone, listen to the reasons we do want to play someone, pay attention to defense, pay attention to offensive line, stuff like that. I've improved a ton this year. You guys have also helped me in terms of DFS. I've come out ahead every single week. Listen to what we say, listen to the logic, and the logic will usually win. Sometimes you get hosed, but logic almost always prevails.
Remember, get your screenshots in. Now, this is if the guys under $6,000 don't return at least 3 times their value. I think they're going to. So we're probably not going to have any entries for the jersey giveaway after this week. But if we do, and you play those guys, send those screenshots, and you'll be entered to win the Tyler Boyd autographed jersey. As always, thank you for listening to the Super Flexology Start Sit series. For myself, John Bauer, and the rest of the team here, have a great night.